Hello again, my lovelies, and welcome back to another set of reviews from Through the Eyes of Enji, where we're looking at doing 101 films in 365 days, raising money for the Shawbury Village players, and we are with you. And yeah, I'm very aware that it has been a while since any of these reviews came out, but blame my holiday, blame real life kicking me while I'm down, and let's have some fun and go through another 5 films. Starting with one of the reasons why this has been taking so long, because it's taken me ages to watch Atlantis The Lost Empire. Now, it was released in 2001, directed by Gary Trousdale and Kirk Wise, written by Tab Murphy and Kirk Wise, based on a story by Gary Trousdale, Kirk Wise, Joss Whedon, Bryce Zabel, Jackie Zabel, and Tab Murphy. Starring Michael J. Fox as Milo, Claudia Christian as Helga, James Garner as Rourke, John Mahoney as Preston Whitmore, and Corey Burton as Moley. A young linguist named Milo Thatch joins an intrepid group of explorers to find the mysterious lost continent of Atlantis. Right, so I've talked before about what are the really hard films to review and how comedy is probably the hardest because people find different things funny. And probably the third hardest one is to film that is just genuinely brilliant, but for surprising reasons, because you can't really go into the surprising reasons without giving away some aspect of the plot. But ironically, straight bang in the middle of that, the second hardest thing to review is something that is very average, because there's nothing that's particularly interesting about how bad it is, and equally there's nothing that's really that interesting about how good it is. Now, Atlantis the Lost Empire, to begin with, felt like that second category. It felt very average. But I kept watching because it had a very interesting animation style, even though it was kind of painfully predictable with who the villain was going to be, where the story was going to go, how it was all going to wind up. And in a way, it almost felt a bit like a missed opportunity because the film had a lot of good supporting characters. I mean, fuck Cookie and the Mole, but the rest of them were interesting characters who we could have spent a lot more time developing. I mean, even the aforementioned Cookie and Moley might have been better characters if we had spent more time with them rather than rushing through with everything from Milo's perspective. So the film really kind of rushes through it at a breakneck speed and isn't really given time to breathe. And it's only an hour and a half long, and it feels like a film that could have done with another half an hour, just expanding the film and taking advantage of the beautiful animation as the film goes through. And, despite all that, I really quite enjoyed Atlantis The Last Empire. I thought it had an absolutely cracking climax that really showed off what animation was like in the noughties and how it was developing and improving. There was, you're thinking of the Emperor's New Groove and the Road to El Dorado era, which, it was a great start that just kind of stopped. With this kind of flash of the 90s and the increase of one digit to another really changing the game with computer game consoles going from 2D to 3D and the advancements there kind of killing off an entire genre of platformers, and in argument's sake could have destroyed two of the, well, not destroyed, but severely weakened the two biggest players in the game with Sega and Nintendo, leaving us with the upstart Sony to take the crown. And it feels a little bit like Naughty's animation felt the same way, with the Pixar juggernaut kind of overwhelming everything, which is a real shame because the climax of Atlantis The Last Empire is one of the more impressive things I've seen on watching an animated film in recent memory. And, Atlantis it's good old-fashioned pulpy sci-fi, very much in the same vein as Flash Gordon, the TV show, and 77 Star Wars before it. It's just an enjoyable, fun ride that's really nice to look at, with great characters that, granted, we don't spend much time with, and it is a really good Sunday afternoon film, which is when I watched it. And it's the kind of thing you can just curl up on a Sunday afternoon and lose yourself in for an hour and a half. And yeah, if you've got kids, it's a great way to spend some time. It's the voice acting is really good. It was bugging me who was doing the voice of the King of Atlantis until towards the end of the film, when I picked up that it was Leonard Nimoy. But it's just a good film. It's not brilliant. It's not going to change your life, but it's good fun to watch, and yeah, highly recommended. Give it a go. That came in about 10 seconds in earlier than I thought it would. So let's move on. We've got a bit of a double bill with this one because we're talking about both of the films that Tracy has asked me to do. Starting with one that was difficult for me to review, because we were looking at The Dead Poets Society. Dead Poets Society was released in 1989. It was directed by Peter Weir and written by Tom Schulman. It starred Robin Williams as John Keating, Robert Sean Leonard as Neil Perry, Ethan Hawke as Todd Anderson, Josh Charles as Knox Overstreet, and Gail Hansen as Charles Dalton. The maverick teacher John Keating uses poetry to embolden his boarding school students to new heights of self-expression. So I think one of the things that people tend to remember about Dead Poets Society, and certainly the things I remembered, was Robin Williams as John Keating doing a great performance, Carpe Diem, and standing on the desks. And if you asked a lot of folk who was in it, apart from Robin Williams, they might remember Ethan Hawke in one of his earlier roles, but I doubt they'd remember many other people. So I think the first thing I just want to stamp on is there are other people in this film than Robin Williams. And Robin Williams, great as he is, and we'll come back to that in a moment, he's not in the film all that much. The film is about the boys at the school more than it is about the teacher. Now, that being said, Robin Williams is fantastic here. And if there was any need for early evidence that he was a genuinely good actor and not just a very skillful comedian, then I think Dead Poets Society and Good Morning Vietnam were early indicators. And yeah, he kind of followed the route of going in for high-speed comedy because he was born to do it. He was very gifted at it. But he was a terrific actor apart from that. And the rest of the cast do acquit themselves well, but Robin Williams really does a great balance between the quiet, well-read teacher, and you can feel the elements of his comedy persona coming in, as he does some more of the high-energy segments of the film, and the quick talking, and the laughing, lovable teacher. But, Ethan Hawke is terrific in this, and the whole cast are really good. The problem, really, again, there's stuff about Dead Poets Society that I really like. It's got a great, really emotional ending. It's a good use of the setting, and it does follow a number of British boarding school stereotypes, and I should know, I attended them. But it's not over-the-top stereotypes, and yet it feels almost like it was written for the stage rather than for the screen. And I'm not just saying that because of the driving plot thread of how one of the lead characters, played, again, extremely well by Robert Sean Leonard, is wanting to get up on stage rather than follow the route that his father's chosen for him. But watching Dead Poets Society again, it wasn't as good as I remembered. It was quite sappy in places. It didn't feel like an organic story. It felt like we knew what the beginning was, we knew what the end was, we knew the catalyst was going to be Robin Williams. But the middle kind of flounders because of that, because we have an eventuality, and when the middle of the film doesn't develop the characters as much as you would hope. I mean, certainly the meetings of the Dead Poets Society isn't some of this kind of life-changing, organic spreading of the senses, this being able to express yourself more widely from reading poetry. It doesn't read like that. It feels like a bunch of boys in the woods reading poetry books to each other, and some of them picking up on it, and most of them not. And it definitely, Robin Williams does support the sagging of the film in the middle, but it definitely feels lacking in the second act, and for quite a lot of the third act, really. So, Dead Poets Society, if it's the first time you've watched it, it's very slow. It's got a great performance by Robin Williams, and honestly, I think at this point, despite loving the film when I first watched it, I'm starting to think that the performance by Robin Williams is what is the attraction of this film. And if you want to see a great Robin Williams performance, Good Will Hunting is so much better. Good Morning Vietnam is so much better. Dead Poets Society was good. I think it's just been left behind. So no, I wouldn't recommend that one. Oh, that was depressing. Let's move on. Oh, great. So the next one we've got is this is an interesting one. Next one we're looking at is The Gangs of New York. Gangs of New York was released in 2002. It was directed by Martin Scorsese, written by Jay Cox, Steven Zaillian, and Kenneth Lonergan. It stars Leonardo DiCaprio as Amsterdam Vallon, Daniel Day-Lewis as Bill the Butcher Cutting, Cameron Diaz as Jenny Everine, Jim Broadbent as Boss Tweed, and Liam Neeson as Priest Vallon. In 1862, Amsterdam Vallon returns to the 5 Points area of New York City, seeking revenge against Bill the Butcher, his father's killer. Gangs of New York has very interesting ties to real life and history of New York City. And as well as that, the actual making of the film, its constant delays, make for an equally interesting story. However, because we're doing a 5-minute review, I'm not going to cover those. I'm just going to look at the film itself. However, if you do want to read up on that, believe me, it makes for interesting reading. Gangs of New York, much like Dead Poets Society before it, is a film of halves. The opening half of the film just flies. It's a brilliant film, an examination of a New York in the era. In many ways, a powerful love letter from Scorsese to the city of his birth, albeit one that's violent and blood-soaked at the same time. But the film loses some momentum towards the end and becomes more about wider social issues within New York City at the time, more than describing the enclosed environment of the 5 Points and the revenge story between DiCaprio and Daniel Day-Lewis. However, the opening 10 minutes or 10-15 minutes of the film preparing for a gang fight in the 5 Points between Priest Vallon and the Butcher is some of the best cinema in all of the cinema. It is a fantastic opening sequence. It's shot perfectly. It's ruthless and brutal, and I absolutely love it. I've watched Gangs of New York many, many times, and that opening sequence gets me every time, especially there's a wide shot of this underground warren in which one of the gangs are living, and it's just a stunningly done shot with Scorsese at his best. And speaking of at their best, Daniel Day-Lewis, the great and powerful Daniel Day-Lewis, as Bill the Butcher, delivers a career-defining role. He's been one of the greats for a very long time. And I know a lot of people signal There Will Be Blood as his best performance. I have never quite agreed, because I saw Gangs of New York. And as Bill the Butcher, this guy trained as a butcher, ready for this role. This is a method actor of the highest degree. And he nails the role because he's both sympathetic and vulnerable and very much a father figure. And at the same time, he is the most ruthless son of a bitch in the film. And he has gotten to where he is through his ruthless, violent nature. And even the scene where he's wrapped in the American flag, talking about how he loves the country, is a phenomenal scene. It's shot very simply, and Day-Lewis carries it completely. And DiCaprio plays off him well. And I've often said that I've never had a problem with Leonardo DiCaprio, except for a brief moment when I was a teenager, when every 13-year-old boy hated Leonardo DiCaprio. But, Romeo and Juliet, he played the part well. Titanic, he played the character extremely well. Except then, stop it at the back. Titanic's good, and you know it. Stop lying to yourself. But when he came back with the Gangs of New York in 2002, it cemented him in a great role that showed he has had a phenomenal career. The cinematography across the film is just stunning to watch. It's a beautiful looking film, and the violence is really violent. It's a very brutal film, and if you can stomach the violence, and if this is probably the harder one, if you can stomach the forced love story between DiCaprio and Diaz, then this is a stunning film that you should watch on the biggest TV you can find. It's readily available. It's on Netflix. I know it's 3 and a bit hours long, but it's worth it. It's a phenomenal film. I still think The Book of Eli is the best film I've watched so far with these films, but Gangs of New York came pretty close. Okay, moving on. We are next going to be looking at the other film that Tracy recommended for me to do. And this one is partially because she knows I love Star Wars and I'm not such a fan of Star Trek. And despite the fact we've covered 2 Star Trek films already, let's look at Star Trek 2009. So, released, unsurprisingly, in 2009. Directed by J.J. Abrams. Written by, oh god, these two, Roberto Orci and Alex Kurtzman. And it was based on Star Trek by Gene Roddenberry. Stars the aptly named Chris Pine as James T. Kirk, Zachary Quinto as Spock, Leonard Nimoy as Spock Prime, Eric Bana as Nero, Eric Bana even as Nero, and Carl Urban as Bones McCoy. The brash James T. Kirk tries to live up to his father's legacy with Mr. Spock keeping him in check, as a vengeful Romulan from the future creates black holes to destroy the Federation one planet at a time. 2009 rolled around and the new Star Trek came out, and I went to see it with a group of friends, one of which whose knowledge of Star Trek at that point was purely the song Star Trekking. And I wonder if, because it was 2009 and the biggest film I was looking forward to at the time was Terminator Salvation, maybe I gave Star Trek 2009 higher praise than it deserved. Because the film as itself, and let's just do it now, the lens flare looks terrible. Don't play the lens flare game. Don't take a drink every time you lens flare. You won't last long past the opening sequence. I think revisiting Star Trek 2009 is the fact. I think I've come to realise that I don't like J.J. Abrams as a filmmaker. I think he copies other people's work and adds his own mystery box, send ideas into it, and it doesn't work. The less said about The Force Awakens and The Rise of Skywalker, the better, because we're on a time limit here. But yeah, he doesn't seem to like space battles in sci-fi films either. They have to be on a planet or hanging very closely in orbit of a planet. We can't just have a grand space battle. And he kind of misses the point of Star Trek in a way as well, because we've looked at 3 Star Trek films here. We've looked at The Motionless Picture where very little happens. We've looked at First Contact, which is a great film with a lot of action, but still holds the feelings of unity and philosophy that Star Trek was always about. And this is just an action film. It doesn't have any of that kind of philosophy in it. It is a Star Trek film that has sword fights and fist fights and callbacks and laser battles and one-on-one fights with very well played Romulan villains. I always get this name wrong. Eric Bana's Nero is one of the better villains in the franchise, but the film is kind of littered with crippling plot holes that are kind of try and sneak you by because they're promising old Spock, but you just want to grab him around the collar and drag him back. And this isn't uncommon with all of Abrams' Star Trek films, including Star Trek Beyond and the one that will not be named. But despite all that, the cast mostly acquit themselves well. I mean, Chris Pine is aptly named because he's really wooden as Kirk. I don't like this version of Kirk. At least when we had the Daniel Craig Bond reimagining, it was very much framed as him becoming James Bond. He had the elements there, but they were just needed smoothing down, sanding off and smoothing down. Whereas this isn't Kirk, I don't think. Kirk was always willing to talk with his fists rather than his mouth. But this version of Kirk doesn't have. Everyone's like, oh, we see greatness in him. But no. Or at least it might be written that way, but Chris Pine can't carry that. But the rest of the cast acquits themselves extremely well. Carl Urban is a great Bones McCoy. It is nice to see new versions of Sulu and Uhura that aren't just window dressing. They actually they contribute to the overall story. Quinto Spock. It. I think the elephant in the room is that Leonard Nimoy returning as Spock Prime, old Spock or Spock Prime or whatever you want to call him, is just a callback to the original films that isn't needed. This could be its own thing. It doesn't need to be part of the established canon. And yeah, it definitely veers away from what Trek was into what Trek now is. And it becomes more about gunfights than it does exploration. And the less said about Simon Pegg, the better. Okay, moving on. I can hear his fanboys clamouring, coming to beat me to death. So, right, let's move on to the last one, courtesy of Gregor. We're looking at the Christmas Chronicles. Released in 2018, directed by Clay Kaytis, written by Matt Lieberman, based on a story by David Guggenheim. Starring Kurt Russell as Santa Claus, Oliver Hudson as Doug, Kimberly Williams Paisley as Claire, Judah Lewis as Teddy, and Darby Camp as Kate. The story of sister and brother Kate and Teddy Pierce, whose Christmas Eve plan to catch Santa Claus on camera, turns into an unexpected journey that most kids could only dream about. Chances are, if you like Christmas films and you've already watched The Christmas Chronicle and you already know that it's starting to slowly work its way into the rotation of the Christmas films you have to watch every year. And yes, this is a bit of punishment for myself, because when I was doing the Christmas films, I thought the only Christmas films I had were Santa Claus versus the something that Tim gave me and The Miracle on 34th Street. I'd completely forgotten that Gregor had given me the Christmas Chronicles. So I had to watch Christmas Chronicles in June. Spoiler warning, I didn't mind too much. And for the record, my Christmas rotation is still The Muppets Christmas Carol, Miracle on 34th Street with Richard Attenborough, and we usually wind up watching Polar Express as well. So, looking at the Christmas Chronicles, it's really well cast, mostly. Kurt Russell is a cracking Santa Claus. The adults in the film all work really well together. There's a pitch-perfect moment for me, which is when I knew I was going to fall in love with the film, when a grown man is given a old 70s Star Wars action figure that he wanted when he was a kid. And that was kind of the moment when I thought, yep, you know what, I can overlook the problems I have with the film. And then I watched it for another 20 minutes, and that was another story. Because whilst it might be perfectly cast in a lot of areas, unfortunately, the child actors, particularly Darby Camp as Kate and Judah Lewis as Teddy, can't carry the stretches of the film that they're required to carry on their own. I can't accept that Judah Lewis is some kind of car thief who needs putting straight by Father Christmas. But much like The Patriot before it was Mel Gibson's film, and it flagged when he wasn't there, but he came back enough times to support it, this is Kurt Russell's film. He does make an absolutely dynamite Santa Claus. And the musical number, we have to talk specifically about the musical number, because it completely reinvigorates the film when it comes along. And yeah, they kind of rip it off and repeat it again in the sequel. The sequel is garbage, by the way. But this one is just pitch perfect. I loved the musical number. Kurt Russell was a great Santa Claus. It is stunningly, sickly sweet. It is massively over the top in that regard. And I can't lie and say it wasn't bothering me by the end, because it was very much, the film became more about delivering presents and this notion of being a true believer. It seemed to be more important than the being kind and sharing at Christmas. And I wonder if the message got skewed there. But we are in generic Christmas film territory where the hallmark moments have to be tacked on for that time of year. And does Kurt Russell save it? Maybe. almost. I mean, this is no Rise of the Guardians for a slightly different Christmas film, but you know that musical number kind of kicks ass. And if you've got children, I imagine they're going to absolutely love this. And there are some very nice twists on the formula. There's some pop culture references, and can't you just say ho ho ho? I'm Santa Claus. I'm not Yoda. And I wonder if the filmmakers were kind of playing on the fact that they've got Snake Plissken to play Santa Claus a little bit, where he is a bit rough around the edges. His clothes look old and battered about a bit. He's a bit greyer than he should be. He's gruff at the same time as with older children, whereas younger children can almost hear a switch flick in Russell's head as he thinks he's talking to his grandchildren. But yeah, Christmas Chronicles, despite watching it in June, is not a terrible film. It's actually a very sweet film. Goes on a little too long. The child actors are quite annoying, and it is kind of sickly sweet by the end of it. But it's enjoyable enough, and as I say, it's probably in your rotation now to watch in the build up to Christmas. Especially those of you who watch Christmas films from about mid-November going forward. Kim, I'm looking at you. But for me, I watch maybe 3 Christmas films a year, and I tend to watch them the day before Christmas Eve, and maybe on Christmas Day. I don't tend to watch more than that, but you know, I enjoy Christmas Chronicles. It was good. It was annoying in places, but it wasn't unwatchable. So, 5 down. Next week, hopefully, 5 more. We're going to be looking at City Lights. I'm going to go a Charlie Chaplin film. That'll be interesting. Night at the Museum, a Ben Stiller film. That won't be interesting. The Boondock Saints, which I haven't watched in years, so that'll be fun to watch. Mars Attacks, which dark comedy. Just suit my mood at the moment. And Lizzie has been kind enough to give me Mamma Mia, which I'm probably going to take a shit on from a high height, because I really don't quite like Mamma Mia that much, and now I have to watch it again. So thank you, Lizzie. Thank you again very much, everyone, for watching. Thank you, everyone who donated. If you still want to donate, you still can. There has been a delay on that, but I'm working on it. It should be getting that out soon. So thank you very much indeed for watching. Hopefully I'll see you in a week. Hopefully I won't delay so much again. Thank you very much for watching.